morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
How are you doing,
Good
Melissa?
morning, I can hear you.
Morning.
Okay, great. Good. How is everyone today?
Good.
Good to hear. So I am your facilitator for breakout room number 2. My name is Melissa Hotain, and I'm coming to you from the Sioux Valley Dakota Nation in southern Manitoba, your neighbor. So I'm happy to be here to lead you in dialogue and discussion on this particular slide here. So you just heard the expert videos, and you heard some of the feedback that came from the 2019 engagement, and maybe some of you were in attendance at that time and will recall the session that was held. I believe it was in Saskatoon. So with regards to this, we're going to open it up for discussion, and all your names on the side here, and having a discussion on what should be put forward within this section here. Oh, we lost it.
Yeah, I will bring it back in a minute. The discussion can start and we'll get it back right away.
Okay, sounds good. So again, for discussion on the new legislation, should it characterize First Nation water rights in direct or aspirational form in a preamble, and including a strong non-derogation and non-abrogation of rights clause in the body of the legislation, and that there be no mention of Crown rights in the legislation going forward. So we'll open it up now for discussion. What are some of your thoughts on this piece? Are we still digesting it, or need some further thoughts on that? So again, some of the things that Delaney had shared, again, the pros and cons of this particular section here. Again, that this proposed option here would definitely be easier to negotiate. It would be non-binding and helps create some guidance for all the parties, and clearly signals that First Nations do have and assert rights over the subject matter without committing nations to definitions for all time and purpose. So we can do this a number of ways. You can use that little option to put your hand up, or you can also put your options in the chat option if your mics are not working or you don't feel comfortable speaking in the room. So we encourage you to provide some dialogue on this.
I got a comment.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay, I'm Jonathan from Cowges First Nation. I'm a council member here. For the aspirational part of it, I think it should be in legislation that First Nations are able to financially benefit if they have that opportunity for their water, by bottling it and selling it and stuff. I know right now it's really not allowed with the Indigenous Services Canada to financially benefit.
Okay. Okay, so do you feel like that is something that's specific to your region, or is that something in general?
Something in general. I think it's up to us if we want to bottle our water and sell it as a retail store, things like that, without being scolded or punished by ISK.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, that's all I wanted to mention.
Okay, thank you. I see a hand up. We have Al Mamoon.
Okay, thank you. I was attending the previous sessions too. So based on my understanding, I think the right aspect should be included in the at the first place, the way it is written in here. So this is my small comment on this.
Sorry, I don't know if I caught that. Say that again.
Okay, I'm saying that the right aspect should be included in the preamble area. So this is
Okay. Okay. Do you agree with that, that rights be included in the preamble? And then the second piece with that is including within the actual body of the legislation a strong non-derogation or non-abrogation clause. Many felt that that was important in the 2019 engagements. I don't know how many are familiar with the current Safe Drinking Water Act, but the way it is written now, although does not really provide for that, which is why that's an issue for discussion in this new proposed framework.
Yeah, Melissa, it's Bing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the objectionable causes in the current act. It was at the discretion of Canada or that part. So it didn't. They would decide, yeah, let's do that. So it was in their favor to decide whether that should be included or not.
Is there anybody else that would like to join? I see a number of people, but nobody has their cameras on. I see someone under the name Cindy McAdam, but there's a gentleman behind the screen. Would you like to share? I see some chiefs. I see Chief Roberta.
Sure. Good morning to everyone. So I like this last one that we spoke to. I think Amanda spoke to it and explained it a little bit more. I wasn't involved in 2019 on this. I was just coming into office then. So I guess some of the things that we definitely need to include in the new legislation is the financial aspect of just getting right down to the nitty gritty. So our water people, they're all underpaid, right? How do we maintain? So we've been working on developing or with ISK. So prior to me coming into office, so it's going on 4 years, and it's all of the red tape within ISK that has, our water treatment plant is over 30 years old and no renovations whatsoever. And it's like the 4th year now. So we'll be going into the 5th year to actually put that new water treatment plant up. And it's the red tape within the process itself. So meaning ISC. We have had 16 boil water advisories within, I believe it was a 3 years span. And I did bring that up to Minister Miller, but we can develop all of this, but some of the problems lie within the process itself, within the departments, right? So how do we overcome that to ensure that nations have that support and they can have all their data, but if they don't have that support, then we're going to be at the same place in the next 10 years. So one of the things that I look at is how can, and I've asked at many tables, how can I get that support for my nation so that our people don't suffer from the rashes, because we have to use more chlorine in the water and etc. We have a home care facility. We have elders that we have to worry about. We have 120 cisterns that we have to worry about because they're not connected. We're located on both in the valley and on top of the hill. So there's many things that we have to look at, right? And how do we word it so that the government is accountable to flowing those funds. So I'm just kind of moving my thoughts around and just hearing everybody speak and just trying to find those best words to come up with to ensure that it's all covered. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing. Floor is open. Would anybody else like to provide their thoughts on this portion of this discussion item here? I'm going to go down the list. I see Larry Ahenakew. Are you there?
Yeah, good afternoon or good morning. No comments at this time. Here to listen and learn. Thank you.
Okay. Kendra McKay. Okay, maybe she has stepped away. Laura Peranto.
Good morning. I don't have any comments. I'm kind of just here as an observer for environmental public health at STC.
Okay, thank you. I see a Chief Brad. Be available?
Yeah, good morning. Brad Swiftall, Moosomin First Nation. Kind of just listening in and learning as well. Not too familiar with the existing act, but in favor of something new. A little bit about what Chief Roberta spoke about was cisterns. Right, a lot of our communities have cisterns and water deliveries. We get funded. I believe it's $100 a delivery, but the actual cost of delivery is a lot higher than that. That and testing of all of those cistern tanks, right? They actually have a lot of people with things you wouldn't believe that are in them cistern tanks. I know the health department has to, it's their responsibility to go in and take a look and do the testing, but it's annual, right? Most times when we do our cistern tank cleaning, sometimes we find odd things in there like bikes and clothes, right? So really an area of concern. And we did there was a documentary done. This one was part of a news release 2 weeks ago, and there's a lot of data in there that talked about underfunding, and yeah, so there's a lot of issues that were portrayed in the discussions. Hold on, I have my daughter and she's needy, so I'll leave it at that for now. But yeah, very concerned. Two themes that. Okay, hold on. Let's go. Two themes that I just wanted to raise here was water quality. It's the big thing, and water protection. Right. A lot of us have industry and around our areas, and I know there was some discussion about mining and environmental impacts of mining. Yes, hold on. And for us, it's SAGD development. So our biggest concerns are lakes and our rivers and our aquifers. But thanks. I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's life with working from home and Zoom. It's understandable, Chief. Thank you for sharing. And I think we kind of cut off at the end there. If you could put your comments in the chat option, just so we make sure that we capture that properly, I would appreciate that. Thank you. I see a Tanya on the line. Is she able to provide some comments to this discussion? Nope. Then I'm going to go over to Randy. I see your light blinking there.
Oh, Randy.
Randy. Yes.
Right.
Yes,
Good
sir.
morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm from Cody Reserve. I could understand and listen and relate to each and every one when it comes to on reserve for the drinking water, the problems we have, the underpaid water tax. I was one for 3 years. So it was a big job doing it. But as I became a leader and I hooked onto a portfolio, the capital, where there was really nothing. But at the time, we had 109 homes that had cisterns. So at the same time, we got a trust, we got a land claims. So I kind of sat with the feds, asked them, if we hook up our 109 homes today, will you reimburse us tomorrow? Believe it or not, they said yes. So I pulled in the trust, got the funding, trained our own guys, put out a call for companies to come and help us out. We found one on the other side of Mosja, and it took us about 4 or 5 months to hook up 109 homes. So now we don't have the cistern system. We're out of it. We have running water. We upgraded our treatment plant. We went way in the back of by the rivers there. We kind of moved the cows away from the water. We dug 5 wells, so we're good to go. We have a sand filter system. So with that, like, it took us a long time. It didn't happen overnight. So at least I could say I accomplished that with the leadership and the elders that wanted to move forward at it, because it was starting to cause problems with drinking water. If somebody didn't like you, you didn't get water, or you had to pay extra. So we solved all that problem and we moved forward. And what I did was met a lady at the U of S out of Saskatoon, and I gave her all my documentations to help out other First Nations on how to hook up the distribution systems, where to access funding, to pull a team together, and it could be done. Change is hard in Indian country, but we did it here. So not saying all our problems are solved, but at least one step at a time and get out of the cistern system. So I kind of could feel for the people that have the cisterns. They're the worst things that we could have this day and age. They're not safe for our people, our kids and elders. So, and if there's a way I could assist any First Nation, I don't have all the answers, but at least I can help advise on what to do and what not to do. So with that, it's an honor to listen in at the AFN level and to kind of get all our First Nations involved, because that's one thing, despite our politics or this one, we all have one thing in common: water. At the end of the day, we need it. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you. Can I ask you one question, Randy? What are your thoughts on this discussion item of rights and responsibilities? What are your thoughts on that option that was presented?
Rights and responsibilities? Kind of don't have any really on a reserve. We're governed by tribal councils, by Health Canada, and then I don't know. It's pretty flimsy.
But if we were to, oh, sorry,
go ahead.
I'm sorry to cut you. But if we were to include for new legislation, what would be ideal based on that option there?
We're talking about water protection. Like us, you don't have the mine stripping. We don't have no industry like that. Ours is farming, and usually the biggest problem we have is with farmers putting chemicals in our land. That's one of the things that we have in our area here. So that would be one of the things is chemicals is really going to do our water in the future. But we try to get a handle on it. But you got some farmers that will do it illegally, but they're kind of hard to catch. But we're monitoring them and not moving cattle close to the water. So that's what we did. We put a barrier of 1,000 meters away from our water system, or even garbage dumps. That's another thing. We got a lot of landfills that need to be decommissioned, and then not only that, abandoned water wells we got to look at. So it kind of snowballs into a lot of things when it comes to water.
Thank you for that. And that's actually would be a good discussion when we talk about transboundary water and source water protection later on in this afternoon. Is Gary Sparvier on the call?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to tell you, I've actually worked for ISC for 26 years as a funding services officer. And, I think the biggest issue is inadequate funding, right? Because, they fund water treatment plant operators at X amount of dollars. And in most cases, a lot of these First Nations, from my experience, is that they weren't spending the full amount on those water treatment plant operators. So they weren't, they were underpaid basically. But I think today, right now, I mean, and I can only speak for COSIS, is that, we have an upgraded water treatment plant. We still need, I think we still need more water operators in order for us to better serve our members. And I think, as John mentioned before, being able to sell our water and make it into a business would be an option too. Right now we have people along the lake that come over and get our water, and we are doing that already apparently. So, but yeah, I think the most important thing right now is inadequate funding in order to sustain our current water treatment plants and have the adequate water treatment operators. Thank you.
If I could ask you a follow-up question, what are your thoughts on the inclusion of characterizing First Nations rights in the proposed legislation? Like the option there had talked about in form in the preamble, and then more stronger language in the body of the law.
You know what? I haven't really thought about it, but I just want to hear what everybody else has to say, and then then I'll probably be able to comment more.
Okay. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Who haven't we heard? Well, thank you. Yes. I see a Dallin LaValle. Or Darlin, sorry. My eyes are...
Just wanted to say that we had the breakout room will end in 2 minutes approximately.
Okay.
Hi, good morning.
Okay,
I'm LaValle here. I'm a consultant for Pipe Up First Nation. Yeah, sorry, I joined late, but yeah, so it's 20% of the operation and maintenance cost that's to be covered by the First Nation, and lots of First Nations don't have that ability to make 20% of operation and maintenance costs, so that's a huge issue, and it increases our turnover and our operators, and we have operators who want to retire that can't, and then I think protection of water quantity. In kind of relation to some of the changing climate. And I would recommend that our language be used in our acts, like a governing document that governs First Nations people should use Indigenous language. I agree with that. That would be all. I was actually just looking for my notes on the act from 2019, but I couldn't find them in my mess of stuff here.
And something also to remind you, I think they shared in there the list of all the documents from the past. There is a report, I believe, a regional report as well as a national report on the 2019. Thank you for that. And I see, before we finish, I need to direct you to the Menti to complete, if you can. The code will come up on the screen or in the chat comments. And there's some questions in there on this subject item, and that is, do you agree with the new legislation should, and again, as we were talking about, characterize First Nations water rights in direct or aspirational form in the preamble, and then with strong non-derogation and non-abrogation of rights clause in the body, and there be no mention of Crown rights. So there's opportunity here to answer that, and then there's a word bubble question there. What are your biggest concerns regarding the inclusion of water rights in the new legislation? So if you could, we encourage you to take some time to fill that out.
There is also a link in the chat if you prefer to use that instead.
So at this point now, I encourage you to do that. I believe we are on now a 10-minute break, and then we will be going back into plenary at 11:30. Well, thank you for that link. Chief Bradsworth will share the link of First Nations workers and underfunded water systems. These will be shared in the main plenary once it has entered.
Hi, Melissa.
Yes.
I was just wondering, like, you know, I was attending the 2019 session, and one of our respected elder at Saskatoon, she was telling that we don't understand the water now. What did she wanted to do, or to say by this wording? I was trying to understand. She says that water is unknown because the water is not similar to the water she should be imagining, or she saw all her lifetime with respect of pollution, let's say agricultural pollution, or this dumping of this pollutant to the waterways. So she was nice to say that. In that case, like when we are talking about this preamble, how about we include the something like, let's say, the wording, let's say spirituality of water, or their indigenous knowledge connected to water. That should be something we can think about.
In the breakout room is about creating a high-level approach and structure for the governance. And Meryl provided 3 different options. There was status quo, there was cooperative, and then there was collaborative. And then there was also 3 different how to do those things, all right? And that was building, each First Nation building their own institution. There was a regional approach, and then there was also an approach that was national, regional, and local. So these are some things that we're gonna go into our breakout rooms to discuss. As always, feel free to make your comments in the Menti. Yeah, we will go into our breakout sessions now.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We have about, not sure how much time, 20 minutes or less to have a discussion, or a little bit less than that, before we go into lunch. So up for discussion, again, as stated, based on the video that was just shared and the introduction of the slides, is what are your thoughts on creating a First Nation water governance institution? And there was a number of options that were provided there for you. What would work best, whether for your First Nation or for your region, understanding that there's already some existing work going on in this area with regards to water? We would like to hear that. We already have a hand up, and I see Al Manmoon.
May we speak, because there should be some like chiefs and elders there. So I thought like I would raise my hand, but I can wait if somebody want to jump up on just answering, but I would have some comment for sure.
So go ahead, you have the floor, go ahead.
Okay, so, you know, when we talk about this watershed approach or regional approach, local, regional, and national, in all cases, there are other actors. Let's say if you talk about Saskatchewan river system, or even Grand River system at Ontario. So in that case, like the farmers. So how can you, just why I'm saying, like, everybody has different interest, and they're the part of the problem. So how can you accommodate them to bring in a table or kind of board, they can discuss like, okay, it is our First Nation representative, and we would like to discuss with you, because they are part of this problem, biggest issue always. There are some examples. If you look at the Northwest Territory, they have a board, so they discuss with both parties with the similar type of representation from First Nation and non-First Nation. So or the indigenous or non-indigenous. So this is my understanding. Like, if I'm creating this problem, somehow I should be in the discussion process or in the solution process too. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I see a hand up. We see Darlin LaValle.
Hi, everybody. So like at the end of all that, I like the options. I'm a little bit concerned about the 3 different levels because it takes time, and these issues are pressing, and they've been pressing for a really long time. And so like to have those 3 different levels come together and talk, and then at the end of the day, they have another discussion and then another discussion. I'm really worried we're not going to see action in time for changes that are coming in the future. But I think the cooperative governance sounds nice. There's one thing that stuck out to me, and it's that the federal side of things are still compartmentalized. So, and these are all impact of safe drinking. So the Minister of Agriculture, Indigenous Service Canada, these things all impact Indigenous safe drinking water. And I kind of wonder where they are in these discussions. And I noticed that the federal government is putting together a Canada Water Agency. And on a provincial level, the Saskatchewan Water Agency handles all permitting of water, and they control water quantity within Saskatchewan, and that directly impacts First Nations rights to water. And so I'm just kind of, even though if we start to develop our own water commission and start making our own decisions, once we get back to our regional and local levels, will it even have an impact to our water quantity? And so that's just one thing that kind of stuck out to me as we're going through this. There's some biases on a regional and local level. They're, like Mohammed said, there might be different actors with different intentions. So that's kind of difficult to navigate. Yeah, I think that would be it that I got from that. It was just the concern about the Canada Water Agency and how the different ministers impact First Nations water rights.
Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Bing. Maybe if you have some comments in response.
Thanks for those comments, Darlene. Sorry. I was hoping, I'm glad you brought it up at this point. It makes some very good points about the, I guess, the dichotomy between what Canada wants to do and what provinces have and what First Nations want to do. It's going to be a very interesting discussion about that Canada Water Agency. This is something that's really bothering us, throwing these curveballs at us in the middle of our discussions on safe drinking water for First Nations, safe drinking, the legislation for First Nations, and the long-term drinking water strategy, all which impacts our right to water, access to it, which was there before colonialism, and what we are promoting now or advocating now in a very strong letter to the Minister of Environment Canada, Climate Change, and copying Minister of Agriculture. That first of all, we object to the way they're have been and have for some time going out there consulting with Canadians without any regard for First Nations. They just assume they can go out there and consult, and they assume First Nations will jump on it and go on the internet, say, okay, I wonder what Environment Canada is up to these days. We're advocating that these funding, resources, support be provided to regional organizations or others so they can engage with their own nations. And what we've heard so far about the Canada Water Agency is some regions say, what is it? We don't know anything about it. There hasn't been any information provided. So what some regions are doing, and already, I believe, submitting to the Minister of Environment to have their own pre-engagements, what they call pre-engagements. They want to have their own discussions first. They want some answers from Environment Canada saying, what's this about? Why now? We're in the middle of other discussions right now. So that is one thing that we're doing at the AFN is for the high level advocacy work, saying it's all about consultation and accommodation. They need to accommodate the First Nations, whether through their regional organizations or through their PTOs or others, to do their own engagements before you get into a formal consultation with Environment Canada. I'm glad you brought that up, and it's really, I said, throwing a curveball into the work that we're doing. And one of the things that they were very clear with us is saying, it's not a jurisdictional, it won't be a jurisdictional discussion. In other words, don't bring the provinces, territories into this. So in other words, protecting them already. So that's another thing we're objecting to, saying, well, water knows no boundaries. Our nation's territories had no boundaries, no provincial boundaries. Water flows everywhere. And so I believe my little understanding of the NRTA, I think will figure into that discussion also. So they're trying to limit that discussion on the Canada Water Agency as much as they can, but it's not sitting well with us in other regions, particularly Chiefs of Ontario, saying we're going to do our own engagement first, then you can come and talk to us. So just I'm glad you brought that up. It comes up once in a while somewhere along the line, but it's an important discussion.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that if they make this Canada Water Agency, that they would be governing the other water agencies, in terms of permitting and stuff like that. So, there would be some equality there in terms of, boundaries and who gets what downstream. And it's very, very difficult conversations. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you for sharing that information. I'm going to go over now to Chief Roberta.
Hi again. So thank you for bringing that up, Dallin. Is that your name? I don't know if I said that right. That was on the tip of my tongue on our last discussion, but I thought I'd wait. So I too have those same concerns. We have lakes adjacent on either side of us, of my nation, and we've been dealing with blue water. So Saskatchewan Water Agency has been called in, and it's blue LJ is one of the reports, and we're awaiting another detailed report. But another big concern of ours is the Lake Diefenbaker irrigation project. So with that project, it will be and we just did some impact assessment training as well. So many things. When we think about this legislation, I think about the Canada Water Agency, I think about Saskatchewan Water Agency, I think about the Impact Assessment Act, SIR, all of those parties have a part to play in it. The environment, the agriculture. Now, I did have an opportunity last week to ask the Canada Water Agency representative, how are we linking all of this together? meaning how does this flow to the provinces? Because that's who we deal with at the end of the day, is the provinces. And how are we going to link it all together so that we're not going to that government, to that government, right? And how is this all going to flow? And there was no answers given to that question. They're still in the stages of developing it. So, I mean, we have on reserve our water treatment plants and our boil water advisories and all of that. But at the end of the day, we have our lakes that is governed through the, governed through the Sask Water Agency. They determine what the water levels will be. I do have an adjacent nation to me, Pasqua, Muscopedian, and Pipot. And I believe Pasqua and Muscopedian have a Capel water management, but they really don't adhere to that water management agreement either, meaning the province. So we just need to be really careful on how we create this legislation, opting in, I know we need to expedite it, but at the same time, we need to be very careful because we are the protectors of the land, the air, and especially the water. And without water, we don't have life. Water is everything that we as First Nations people hold in the highest regard, right? So just wanted to make those comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Chief. I'm going to open. Randy, are you wanting to say something?
No, go ahead. I was just kind of listening. It's pretty interesting, but Catherine, here we deal with a tough government. It's pretty tough, just like what the chief said. So right now I'll just listen and maybe I'll comment later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to provide comments on this topic? On water governance. I'm going to go down my list again. I see Crystal Crow. Are you new to the room?
I just wanted to say the breakout room will end in about 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. We have 5 minutes. So if you have a burning
Hi, sorry. This is, oh, sorry, it's Crystal Crow. Yes, I am new. I'm a counselor for Pipot First Nation, and this is the first time I'm engaging in this or hearing of it, and it's very intriguing, and I'm gaining a lot of information from it. I don't have any questions just yet, but I am going through information as you guys are speaking. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for sharing. We have a couple more minutes left. Is there anybody that would like to provide their thoughts on water governance? I'm going to look to Gary. Are you there?
Yes, I am. I'd like to say I like the collaborative selection, but again, it's going to come down to the regions, because I think, from my way of thinking, is that, I mean, nationally, there has to be the same kind of rules across the board, but when it comes down to the region, because right now, COUSIS is dealing with the Saskatchewan Watershed Authority with our dam. They're trying to move our dam, and this goes back a few years back, but they never consulted us. They were just going to go ahead and move it, right, without our consultation. But now we're at the table, and they've given us some options now, and we said right from the get-go is that, you know what, if you would have included us in these talks right from the get-go, we'd be way farther ahead, rather than right now it's holding up because they wanted to get this done last year. So it's not going to be done for another, year or 2 years, right? So I think, again, collaboratively the way to go, but it has to come down to the region because we're dealing with different provincial governments, right? So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and for sharing that example of the need to always to be ensure Indigenous inclusion in decision making and at those tables. Is there anybody else that would like to share?
Melissa, if no one is talking, so I would take the last moment. With respect of the watershed approach, this should be kind of umbrella approach, watershed. If we take the example of like Lake Winnipeg watershed, then it is coming from Alberta, then crossing Saskatchewan, then going to Manitoba. So it's a bigger like framework. Then you have to bring all the party. Let's say if I'm talking about Saskatchewan, then whoever falling in the watershed, they should be taking part in that committee or the organization. But watershed is a very effective approach, like theoretically, but at the same time, we have to deal with all other issues effective if it is a regional approach or national approach. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I believe we have 2 minutes left before we finish here. Is there any other comments people would like to share on the options that were presented? Tanya, are you on the line? People might be already eating lunch.
Brett here.
Yes, go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, no, just wanted to chime in. This Saskatchewan is not First Nation friendly. We basically seen that throughout the years. And for consultation, there's a letter that comes into the mail, sometimes registered, but if we don't respond to that email, it's taken as we accepted. So a lot of people don't have a lot of our communities don't have capacity for to review these opening these letters, right? So there's a lot of things going on, especially with the I think that like the Diefenbaker irrigation system project, right? It's a big project, and the province is kind of just went ahead and made commitments, and who's looking to move forward. The only way we can participate is actually because the North and South Saskatchewan River run through interprovincially. And the only way we can participate is on a federal, under federal jurisdiction, because it passes through different provinces. So definitely difficult to work with the existing government, and we always need a seat at the table regardless. It's hard when we're participating at the end, right before there's a project announcement already before we were even consulted. So really difficult when we work with the Saskatchewan Water Agency. For us, like we're okay with it because we have 2 employees there, right? But they're just the they're lower level employees. There's nobody up at the like senior management level to have any input for us on the community. I think it's important to have a body there that sits side by side with decision makers. Thank you.
Yeah, so it sounds like more of a collaborative approach is required, what I'm hearing. I'm going to go over to Darlene for the final comment.
I kind of actually plays on that point that Chief Swift-Wolf made about the roles within the provincial governing systems. Having a seat there would be good. I know they're not technically obligated to consult with us, but maybe redefining some of the terms of references and redefining the roles and responsibilities between nations and the provincial government might help. I know lots of times First Nations don't even know that they have the opportunity to develop their own terms of references for many of the operations that go on within their nation or anything that involves them. So if they have this understanding that they can actually guide who's hired or the outcomes using, the terms of reference, that might be useful. But yeah, I think there would just be, in terms of how to flow the funds, there's already such lack of a bit like capacity, like the capacity to do these things, to respond, to engage in commissions. There's already like a lack of that within nations. So adding another role to do it might just, I don't know how you guys are going to do it, but yeah, I guess that would be it, just the TORs.
Thank you for sharing that. I believe we're closing our breakout rooms now. I encourage you to go to Menti again there's some questions related to this discussion item to complete the info, and it's there on your screen as we get, just before we get to close the breakout room. Again, the questions there's 3 of them specific to that. Do you agree with that? The new legislation should again include that option. And should a water commission be explored? And then should governance pursue an opt-in approach for when First Nations are ready? So thank you everyone for your feedback. And I believe we're going to the main room for final, and then we're closing for lunch, and then we're back again at 1 o'clock. Okay, welcome back everybody. Hope you had a good lunch. We are going to jump right into the discussion on transboundary governance, and particularly what the new legislation should look like with regards to clearly setting out First Nations jurisdiction to protect source waters off reserve. I heard a little bit about this discussion in some of the previous things we talked about this morning with regards to source water protection. So maybe we can elaborate a little bit more on that one in this discussion here. I understand there's different issues within the Saskatchewan region that need to be considered, but ideally, how would that work if First Nations had that jurisdiction to protect waters off reserve? What would that look like? I'm going to open it up. Anybody have any burning thoughts or ideas? Darling, please take it away.
I'm a pretty big advocate for First Nations taking action for water quality. So I would think the approach would be grassroots level, citizens, science, taking samples, setting their own indicators, and then hopefully more of an action-based approach, because we know what's wrong with our water. We know there's clear issues, there's clear water quality issues. That's not up for discussion. It's poor, it's very poor. But what are we going to do about it? What tools do we have to make it better? Is agriculture going to be getting better? Is the provincial government going to help start doing anything about it? Is there anything we can do to reduce the nutrients in the water? I think that's where the conversations I've been having are going is, okay, the water's bad. What are we going to do about it? And if that can be discussed on a regional level and taken into concrete action through policy, that would be great.
Hi, may I take a moment?
Yes.
Okay, I really liked the point Darlene has made, and I am glad that she's catching so many things. And I also appreciate the things that like a regional approach, taking a regional approach would be kind of appropriate. And it is always a challenge to bring people together, but we should not exclude the opportunity to bring people like in a forum and have some sort of discussion. In Saskatchewan, there was a meeting last month, I think. They're talking about this agriculture drainage. So in that type of situation, if we could include something like how can we just discuss this in a greater forum, definitely indigenous community would have a bigger role to play there. But at the same time, we always would seek the opportunity to learn from others, because everybody is part of the problem. So thank you, Darlene, to bring this good point to discuss in here.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have some thoughts with regards to this? You can either put your hand up or use the chat option. Ira? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I agree with Darlene that the water quality is poor in our area, particularly surface water. But I feel it's an enormous task to try change the water pollution that's occurring from industry and agriculture. I mean, it would be good if we could, but as a First Nation or even a tribal council, that's an enormous task to try and do. I, as a water operator, would try to concentrate efforts on treatment of that water. I mean, it's good to know what's coming down the river or in the aquifer to identify it and put a treatment process in place so that it remains, safe and healthy for your community. But no, I do agree that something should be done with water source protection offers there. But when that topic comes up with me, we only can control on reserve, like our wells and our stuff like that for water source protection for me. Once you leave the boundaries of the First Nation, it's such a big task that, it would take, it would take something great to change how industry and agriculture is polluting our waters today. I just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that, Ira. You're saying it would take great efforts to change the current system, but if there's an opportunity to change that system through legislation, how would that look? What type of mechanisms would you need in your region to ensure that all people were at the table and there was a watershed-based approach? What would that look like? And how would you begin?
For me, it would be a water commission that's also tasked with protecting our treaty rights. But the commission or commissioner would have to have the powers to be on par with the provincial ministers when they're taking water issues at the federal level. I think when the minister responsible for water in Saskatchewan is speaking at the federal level, we should have a commissioner or a commission representative there that is on par and has a speaking voice and a vote at the table. And particularly the water permits that the provincial government oversees and gives out with no consultation to First Nations who are affected by the water quality or quantity, sorry. So I don't know. I think that might be a start. Is a commission that has some teeth to it. That's on par with the provincial ministers.
Good recommendation. Thank you for sharing that. Is there anybody else that would like to share some thoughts on this discussion? We have about 10 more minutes left. I see Gary. Gary, are you wanting to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, more and more are taking over their own lands and starting to farm their own lands, and Cowes is one of them. And to me, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, because all farmers, including First Nations, I mean, in order to get a cash crop, you have to use chemicals. So on one hand, to get that cash crop, you got to input all these chemicals. And same with the non-First Nation farmers. They've been doing that for years, right? Because it's all about making the almighty dollar. So on the other hand, how do you control that, right? And how do you not put chemicals into the land and not try and get that cash crop? So I guess that's another question. I mean, I'm not a farmer, but I'm just learning right now. And down the road, hopefully there's something we can do about that.
Okay, thank you for sharing that point.
Melissa, I think there's a mistake on the schedule. I think we're going to go to around 11 or 1:40 or 1:45.
Yeah, someone had put in the room here. Yeah, 1:45. Yeah. Okay. Okay, does anybody else have any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, Brad here.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's important because, again, when I don't want to always point fingers at the province here, but really at the end of the day, they're the guys with the pen to approve projects off reserve, right? And like for us, we had there's a small Sag B development. There's still 6,000 barrels of oil a day that they're producing, and it's right beside our lakes, right? So eventually they're going to be all around the lake, which really, being a non-project application and getting approved, they just kind of bypass the environmental review, so they don't have to go and do a environmental assessment. They're just gonna given a permit, and they're given the I guess the okay to proceed with their projects and development. And really, it just bypasses the consultation component for First Nations in and around the area, because it does impact treaty rights to hunt, fish, and gather because of these facilities, right? You can't really go to those locations anymore because although they have a small footprint, they're technically advanced to do a lot of underground oil capture. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there, that it's just a project and a non-project are two different things. At the same time, that does impact, like I said before, my previous comments, it impacts our biggest worry is the aquifers, right? And most of our communities in the area here, they are all groundwater wells, not surface wells. So those are my comments for now.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. So big concerns for our aquifers and groundwater sources. Darlene, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I know it would be difficult to start having these conversations, but I think it's really important that we start including industry in our conversations, because they are the biggest polluters. They're making economic gains, and the end user is not the person who pays for the pollution. It's usually First Nations people, well, in Canada, in a Canadian context, and Indigenous people around the world, actually. So, best management practices for industry, if I could implement something off reserve, it would be best management practices for agriculture, for industry, best ways to manage nutrients, policies to ensure that they're irrigating responsibly. And because we know economics is going to keep going, it's a staple of Canada to have economic gain. So as long as they're doing their best to make things safe, I think that would be a good place to start.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Is there anybody else on the line that would like to provide some comments on this topic? Randy, you had talked a bit about source water protection previously. Are you on the line? Oh, maybe he stepped away. I'm gonna go to.
Hello?
Oh, there you are. Hello, hi, we can
Hello?
hear you.
Oh, yeah, no, there's a guy there that put me on mute or something, but I'm back. I was listening all this time, and yeah, I don't know, it's just like what everybody says, I kind of agree, and it kind of comes to the end of the day of getting everybody to the table, right, from the water tech to the federal, provincial, the chief and council to an elder, and get the ball rolling and keep it consistent. Talk about protecting our land, our water. Us, we're lucky we don't really have major industry north of us here because of different reserves. We have two rivers, the Assiniboine and White Sand Rivers, so at least we're lucky in that area. But it's not like we gotta wait for a disaster and then act. But you know, it's kind of good to get the ball rolling now and keep an eye on our water. When I was a water tech, that's what I did. I know I had a small table, but at least we tried to talk about with our landfills, old water wells, the farmers, the animals, even the hydrites we're trying to set up north of us. We caused a kind of a stink about that, and then we made them move towards Manitoba, where their whatever they have there would flow towards Manitoba, not towards us. So already we kind of had that protecting our land and putting up a fight, and like there's no oil wells here, there's no stripping of the land. Sure, we're looking for gravel, but every time we do that, we work with the government to come and do a environmental assessment where we can dig and where not to dig, but at the same time always protecting our aquifers. So with that, that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Oh, we have 2 minutes left. Does anybody else want to provide some comments? I'm looking at someone I haven't heard from recently. John? Oh, hi. Go ahead.
Hi. I would like to thank both of the presenters, like Randy and the other one. You know, just it is interesting. If you look at this science, the way they do their work, they will talk about like a source water protection. So this type of terminology or the push that source water is the I have to protect because this is they can do, but taking the holistic approach like what Randy was telling, that our ducks are not enough or the wildlife are gone, our water, the aquifer are polluted. So I always think that way it would be so much like appreciative of the issue that if we could take a holistic approach, not like here and there, and take one piece at a time. And you know, this ecosystem is a complex process. So in that part, like if we exclude one from other or try to do it separately, we hardly can reach on a solution. So reach to a solution. So this is my understanding. Although government comes up with different program, different plan now and then, and different funding model even, I get bothered with this. Like how you can separate this like one issue from the other. So we better push from the beginning to take a holistic approach. There should be like bleach system, there should be like ecology, there should, okay, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Okay.
No, like I got, I hope that you got my point that we really have to push to take a holistic approach than just being scattered to all these things we are trying to do. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to refer you now to the Menti, to the poll. If you could take some time to answer these questions as we go into the next session here. Do you agree that new legislation should assert First Nations jurisdiction to protect source waters off reserve? And the next question, there we go.
Hey, sorry, did you want to finish that thought, Melissa? Oh, Melissa, you're muted. Sorry, I'm just gonna, okay, go ahead.
Oh, there we go. No, I was just reading the questions. If they could take the time to answer those, that would be great.
Okay, great. Okay, the breakout rooms are now closed. Amy?
Thanks, Evan. Are we able to pull up the Menti polls again? We can get some feedback on these last questions here. So the question from the last section was, do you agree that the new legislation should assert First Nations jurisdiction to protect source waters off reserve? So there was a yes and a maybe. And the next question, should First Nations jurisdiction be pursued at all costs in the new legislation, despite limitations that may be imposed by provinces and territories? And we had a resounding yes there. And the word bubble is, what are your key concerns about transboundary jurisdiction considerations? So alliances for profit, and this is interesting. I think we're seeing this in a lot of regions where there are water companies like Nestle that are impacting source waters. Roles and responsibilities, action-based discussion, that's great. Shared jurisdiction works, and water quality guidelines. So great feedback. Thank you, everyone that participated. And again, feel free to continue to provide your comments into the Menti section. So on the agenda, we were scheduled for a break now, but I feel like we just got back from a break. So I'm gonna, if no one is opposed, I'm gonna push to end the break after this next topic, which is funding and finance. So Delaney, if you would please share your wisdom with us on the funding and finance section.
Definitely. And just the next slide, please. Awesome. So I'm just going to walk you through the three options we have here for funding and finance. So option one would be to create a national funding mechanism, such as a First Nations Infrastructure Institute or something similar, more applicable to water, to apply to all First Nations under the legislation. This would provide certainty and clarity to all parties. It's predictable, transparent, and it's also likely to get buy-in from the Crown, at least in principle. A con to this option is that it might not be flexible enough and also may be rejected by some First Nations. What we heard from First Nations in 2019 was that this approach might be a bit too close to the status quo that we are currently in now, but it was somewhat favored by some regions. Option two was to create a partial funding arrangement that defines principles and approaches. So this could be something like a commitment to actual cost funding and asset management, but does not define specific processes for financing. So this creates some certainty while also allowing for flexibility and innovation as we're moving forward. So nothing's stuck in stone, but those aspirations are there, and there is a partial arrangement. So it could be structured as a transitional approach while a more permanent solution and our structure continues to be negotiated. The con of this is that it doesn't create a guarantee for First Nations and risks that by default administration will fall to ISK policies if there's nothing there in the meantime. And, you know, as we all know, this is frustrated First Nations aspirations and held up important projects for years, and has just led to not having access to clean drinking water. But there is some advantages to this approach as well. So this approach was somewhat favored. Option three would be to not address financing mechanisms at all in the new legislation. So this would be easy to achieve as it's the Crown's preferred option. But as we know, this is kind of just kind of pointless given the fact that we're trying to use this for legislative reform. So this would just be kind of really much the status quo as we're currently dealing with the Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act, which did not set aside funding at all for this. So this was also not favored in any region, but just to give you that kind of context. So now we're going to watch a video by Kevin Page, who is one of Canada's former parliamentary budget officers, who's going to get into this issue a bit deeper. And the question that we're going to be looking at is the new legislation should create a funding arrangement or mechanism that defines approaches and principles, and that this mechanism or arrangement or approach should include funding mechanisms that commit to funding water and wastewater in its entirety. So the true cost of this, that eliminate competitive funding and evolve based on community needs. So this is what we heard really across the region in 2019. So this is the question that we're going to be discussing today, and we're eager to hear your thoughts. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Kevin Page.
Great, thank you. So we're going to, again, go back into our breakout groups. And this time we're going to be discussing the new legislation should create a funding arrangement or mechanism that defines approaches and principles. It should include funding mechanisms that commit to funding water, wastewater in its entirety, that eliminate competitive funding and evolve based on community needs. So again, just to comment that the engagement that was done last year was focused on supporting this. So now just having more discussion about what this could actually look like and what are the details within here to help provide and guide AFN going forward. So we're going to go into our breakout groups, and then we'll meet back here after.
Okay, thanks, Amy.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Our times are a little off on the agenda now. How long are we going to?
Yeah, we're going to go for about 20 minutes of discussion. So I'll put something in the chat box right away here.
That's good, thank you. So again, the title's not correct. It's supposed to read financing. And we just watched the video from Kevin Page, who raised some points regarding you can't legislate water without First Nations. There needs to be co-development, and legislation should address the funding shortfalls and closing the gap. So it's open now for your discussion to hear how that would work. For discussion, should that new legislation create a funding arrangement or mechanism that defines the approach and principles? And it should include funding mechanisms that commit to the true cost of water and wastewater. I heard a little bit this morning in our discussions of First Nations having to provide the 20% top up for water and wastewater. In actuality, sometimes this is much higher than that cost. So I'd like to open it up for discussion on your thoughts on this topic, sorry.
So Melissa, speaking.
Yes.
Yeah, so just maybe a little bit of elaboration on the point there, competitive funding. Something what we heard during our 2019 engagements was to set up a system that doesn't put First Nations against each other. In other words, vying for funding. Getting into a competitive proposal, I guess, what the best proposal writers, be able to eliminate that so everybody has provided.
I don't know if that was my internet going down or if that was Bing. I didn't hear that well.
Yeah, Irving, if you wouldn't mind saying that last 2 sentences again.
Competitive, explain the competitive piece on that statement. It refers to having a system or financing system, funding system that doesn't make First Nations compete against each other for those resources. So have in such a way that there's fairness for all First Nations to get adequate funding.
Hi, Arvin. Good to see you, my friend.
How are you?
But yeah, like, just I would like to add a little bit of things with your comment, like with respect of like putting in a competitive situation. It is really turn up from many nations to go with any other type of, let's say, application. It's a lots of hassle. And after that, like after working with all this application process and everything, what we try to do and what happened in the end, that so many people don't get it. Like this funding doesn't happen to everybody. So I really would appreciate if the government is convinced whatever the things coming, it should be like not in a competitive way, because it is a real need. So they put in a competitive situation for every funding. So there should be an ending of this. So this is my simple comment.
You're right. Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody else have any feedback to this issue? I know funding is probably something that affects all of you. We'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
I got a comment. It's just a follow up to what he said, is that, it should be based on need, because every First Nation's water issues are different, and some, been on water advisories for, forever, right? So it should be based on need. Then we're not competing for the same monies all the time.
Agreed. Thank you. Darlene, are you wanting to say something?
Hi, yeah. I'm currently studying climate change, and there's large discussions happening right now about climate change and climate change adaptation, and we're falling even farther behind with the times in terms of, okay, we can't even get clean drinking water, and now we're trying to adapt to a changing climate. And I just feel like what we're doing right now isn't working. The way we're allocating funds, the way our departments are set up, they're not all in-house, they're not all involved in the conversations. And I feel like there really needs to be an overhaul of every infrastructure department, and they need to be all included. There's possible ways to innovate, but there's no way to govern it because there's no policy around it. There's huge amount of money in storing water, but there's natural ways of doing it, and we can't do it because there's no policy. So I'm just wondering if what we're doing right now is even going to work, and if we need to look at it from a completely different angle. I know it's like a big undertaking to completely just crumple the paper and start over, but I mean, it's not working.
Melissa?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's I guess that's the challenge of what we need to press the government for, using their own words, of sustainable, predictable funding as we move forward. There's organizations, departments that have $180 billion Infrastructure Canada, and another 33 billion of that for Canada Infrastructure CIB section of that. That just announced or earlier, 5 days ago, a $1 billion fund for First Nations to access for various projects, 5 categories: green infrastructure, connectivity, some water infrastructure. So they have the money that they have. I recall the Minister of Infrastructure, Miss Catherine McKenna, saying public, I have $180 billion that I can't use because they don't know how to set it out. So, I mean, part of that is when we look at the even ISCs, what they call the Indigenous Services Act. We brought this up yesterday, I think, that Indigenous Services Canada is going to get out of the picture sooner or later, hopefully sooner. And they're supporting First Nations organizations, regions, and others to develop their own entities, whatever you want to call them, authorities, to take over. Particularly in our case, water and wastewater systems, source water protection systems, to do that. And so I think we have a strong point here, and take the opportunity to say, okay, we know that you're interested in doing this, and we're moving forward in our legislation some way or another to make sure that adequate funding is included in there somehow. Like one of those options says, it might be difficult. From what we've learned, maybe only other 2 legislations have had specific funding requirements in the legislation itself. So generally, they don't like putting funding in the legislation. Basically, one of the reasons why they put the original Safe Drinking Water Act through Senate bills don't need to show where the money comes from. That's why they did. But this time around, the new legislation, we've been told, will be tabled in the House, and any House bills have to show the resources to support that bill. So I think we have something going for us there, but also a big challenge, I think. How do we embed that in the body of the legislation? And we have 2 precedents to look at. So I think we all know that will never be enough money, but we have to press them to provide as much resources as they can so that long-term the drinking water advisories are eliminated, new systems are fixed. I think somebody today talked about a water system that's 30 years old. That shouldn't be up for renewal at this time, 30 years old. So I think there's the opportunity to do that, to show that the government has to come through on their talk. I guess they talk the talk, they must walk the walk. And where's the money?
Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks, Bing.
Hello, Melissa. I would like to add a little bit on that talk given by Arvin as well. I was reviewing the Bill C-69, and at that time, the same issue came. Somebody, he is not an indigenous person, but he pointed out something very interesting at the comment box, that they have 5 different offices for 5 different projects. So it is good to have some people working in their setup, and at the same time look at that. Like if you think like how much coming to the specific band or tribal council, this is very little, because the money is taken away to fund their staff or people working and at the high level like office, like, you know, this is what he was saying. So that is an interesting point, that there should be a kind of like a comprehensive funding model, then not separating this fund into 5 different areas, and then 200 people would be working and sitting in the government level, and indigenous community will get a little money, and they have to compete for small money.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Can we hear from some other participants? I'm sorry, Ira, I believe you were cut off previously in the last one. Did you want to share something in this discussion here?
Yeah, just in regards to new legislation development, I think it's no surprise that infrastructure dollars on First Nations have been severely lacking in what we actually need for some years now. I think the new legislation has to include something that has an annual increase in it and not be set in stone and not looked at for many years. But I think another point has to be that if we're going to put money towards infrastructure, that funding that comes to the First Nations is really earmarked for those projects and can't be used for anything else. Like Al says, for wages or the higher up people to be paid. I think there has to be some strings attached to those dollars that come out, that even for the water treatment plant, any money coming to the water treatment plant should be spent only on the water treatment plant. I know in operator salaries, IFC has tried to solve that by providing some operator retention money for certified operators, but there's no saying that money has to be spent specifically on operators. And if it is said, it's not always followed. The operator will sometimes be underpaid, even though the band is receiving this additional retention money for their operators. So I think a lot of the times that when we receive money, it has to be specific for the program that it's being funded for. Thanks.
Yes, I remember that. I recall that also being shared in other regions across Canada as well. So thank you for sharing that. I see a new member on. Ed Dumont, would you like to provide some feedback?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, how are you doing? Ed here. I was just listening to some of the funding comments as far as operation. I'm a headman for Oakneys First Nation, but I did operate for the past 12 years in our water treatment facility. And as far as the boil water advisories is, I feel like for operators, they need to get paid more. Like the interest of the operation is not there if you're getting minimum wage for the last 12, 13 years working in a facility. Also, training needs to be increased to assess the plant, because I heard comments of all plants are run different and treatments are run different. So like there's the cost issue there. Like as far as the legislation, there maybe that could be looked at, like the type of plant they're running, because all different plants are using different types of chemicals. So, you know, and that cost factor adds up over the year. You know, like some stuff costs more, some are less, and maintenance in the plant. You know, like if the operator doesn't know how to fix like a simple, like for example, an O-ring, you know, and you gotta hire somebody to come in, and that's doubling the cost, right? So training like that might help out operators and work towards getting off the boil water advisory. But yeah, that's just a comment on that legislation. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed, for sharing. How about Laura Peranto? Are you there?
I just wanted to say we have 5 minutes left.
Okay, thanks. Okay, she's not responding. I'll go back to Ira.
Yes, I just wanted to further comment on the funding part as far as training. So much for the funding for the water treatment plant that's only receiving 80% of the funding needed to run the plant. I understand it's supposed to be up to 100%. I don't know if that's coming in this coming year. I'm hoping so, because we've been operating at 80% funding for some years now, and it's really starting to show. So it'd be welcoming to see the 100% funding for our water treatment plants in the next budget. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is funding for the training of the operators. You have a water treatment plant operator that's got to spend 1 year in the water treatment plant. He goes in to 1 week of training, 4 days, and he writes his exams. And if he's successful and he passes, he goes back to the water treatment plant and he's in charge of operating a multi-million-dollar water plant with very, very limited training. I think the funding should be reinstated so that when I took my training back in 2013, it was a 6-week course to be prepared for your exams. And I don't know where we went away from that, but I think a lot of the boil water advisories that are happening now are a direct result of not enough training for the operators. I think that's kind of what was lacking in the funding from the time I took my training until the way they train the operators now to run the water treatment plants. And the water treatment plants nowadays are a lot more complex than when I started out. They were green sand filters. Now we're in IBROM systems. So it's still 1 week training. I mean, I had more training when I had a simple system, and now you got 1 week of training and you got a much more complex system to run. So that's my comment on funding for operators.
Can I, how much time do you have? 2 minutes. Maybe I'll take 30 seconds to address some of Ira's comments. So we are in a conversation with the headquarters ISK staff, and you probably know that there was a significant funding for water and wastewater O&M announced out of budget 2019, I believe, and it's going to go up from 80 million this year. Additional funding across the country, going up to about 100 and I have this difficulty with number 150 million additional coming out of the A base for water and wastewater. And then the fall economic statement, there's more funding announced for water and wastewater. But we had hoped that working with ISK, that 100% funding meant 100% of actual costs. And that's what we were going all along. Essentially, when we asked them, what do you mean by 100% funding? They said, oh, we didn't mean what you think we meant. It's 100% of the cost reference manual. So going from 80% to 100% of a already underfunded formula. And as we know, even 80% is probably about 40% of actual costs. So, but there's a slow movement going on, and I think the feds are learning, are listening to us.
Okay, thanks, Bing. I'm going to prompt you to now to go to your menti.com and enter that code and answers the questions that are listed on here with regards to this issue on funding. We talked about the first one already, and then should a national funding mechanism be created to fund water and wastewater, or is this too close to how things are currently done? And then what are your key concerns about including funding and finance in the new legislation? So there's an opportunity to enter multiple comments in that one, I believe. So thanks everyone for your feedback.
Great video. I know that in our in the breakout group that I was in, we had a lot of discussion around capacity and the challenges that the operators are facing. And I know that we do have a number of operators on the call. So I just want to, again, extend my appreciation to the work that you do in your communities, because it's important and it's needed. And we value the work that you do. So that we're going to go back out into our breakout groups, and we're going to discuss the question. We're going to define some national standards and delineate others for local regional development. So essentially, what do you think should be national standards for water, and what should be put down to the local or regional level for development? And how can there be an inclusion of First Nations culture, laws, and spiritual relationship to the water? Where can that be input? What ideas do you have of how we can include those in standards and regulations for water? So we're going to go to our breakout groups, and then we'll come back into plenary in about 25 minutes, I believe, 20 minutes. So we'll see you back here.
About 20 minutes, I think around 3 o'clock. I'll just double check the schedule.
Great.
Oh yeah, okay, 2:55, then it's time for roundtable. So maybe a little bit less than 20 minutes.
Great, thank you.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So you just heard the breakdown of the discussion for this topic, the final topic for today. So we're in the home stretch now. And you heard a really good video presentation from Phil Tangi on some concepts to consider. So with that, I'm going to open it up for discussion. And maybe we can break it down, your thoughts on this. Focusing first on what would be some areas for national standards that might be applicable to First Nations across Canada. And then secondly, we'll look at what might be some that would be at the local and regional level. I might look first to our operators for some feedback on this issue. Maybe we'll start with Ira. Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I always willing to speak. On the national standards, some of the things that Phil talked about, funding capacity and the maintenance of the traditional perspective. I think funding I kind of spoke to already, and how I felt the water plants are underfunded and the operators are underpaid. He is right that the operators are most important in the community. They're the first line of defense, even in this COVID times. Even, we need water to wash and stay clean, wash our hands constantly. So they play a big role in that. So those workers in those plants never got to stay home or anything. They always had to be at work, making sure the water was flowing so that people could wash and stay safe. Capacity operators is another thing. We've trained many operators that have moved on to bigger and better things, and we don't hold them back or anything, but we see it as a problem in our organization when we send them away for funding. We fund them to go take the training, and they move on. So operator retention is always been a concern for us. I have trained other operators on other First Nations, and proud to say that they both were women, and they're both now level 1 operators. And I like to see a female's perspective in as how it pertains to water, as well as a male, because it's a male-dominated field, really, water treatment plant. So I've taken on the task, and I encourage women to become operators, because they're very diligent and very picky, and everything has to be just right. And that's the kind of employee you want in a water plant. But as far as standards, I think we need to make them a little more stringent. And I sit on a board in Saskatchewan here that is dealing with standards and regulations right now, trying to develop our own. And it's a slow process, and we don't have any funding right now. So we've been working for 2 years with no funding, but I think we've come a long ways as an organization. And I just wanted to put that kind of put that out there. Thanks.
I have a follow-up question for you based on your experience on what would you think, again, would be an opportunity to create for national standards? Do you think something along, obviously, the training? Do you think might be something that would be uniform across Canada?
Yeah, I think the training is a big aspect, and the training, like I mentioned earlier, is very limited. I would for sure add to that because being a water plant operator is a dangerous job. I mean, you're dealing with heights, you're dealing with different gases, you're dealing with chemicals, transportation of chemicals. So to underpay a water treatment plant operator, in my view, is not in the best interest of the First Nation at all. But national standards, I don't know what I could add to that actually, but for sure training and funding of the operators would have to be top of my list there.
Okay, thank you for your follow-up. There was another operator on, was that Randy?
Hello?
Oh, there. Hi, yes.
Hi. Yeah, it's like I said, I looked after the plant here for 3 years, and we kind of had to split the funding with another guy there because he had a family and he was really a smart guy, and he kind of showed us how to do things, and so we kind of helped him out with our wage, so we kind of split it with him. So, but it is a big, dangerous job. That's one of the toughest jobs on it, as everybody said, because you're dealing with people's lives in terms of water safety. So what we did is at night is go flush the lines, and I always look for water breaks because that's one thing I did not want to go under is a boil water advisory because they're hard to get out of. So we always kind of maintained our water system to avoid that. And for the elders, we had once a month meetings to monitor our water. That's when we were kind of developing our water system, our distribution system. We always stayed on the safety, the cleanliness of the community. And then we always, Keys, Goose, and Keys are our neighbors, so I kind of communicated with them also, because we all kind of had the same water stream. Sometimes we'd share chlorine or advice or help one another out. But, and then we kind of, inclusion at the table at every level, because water is very important to each and every one of us, like I said earlier, right from the water plant operator right to the federal official, not to crowd the table, but just a simple team, put it together, and that's how you would kind of move forward with this issue, and always keep the feds involved, because they come with funding also too, timing and deadlines, so it's just kind of a tricky process, but it could be done, and the main thing is to keep it moving, momentum, keep the momentum going. And I'm glad water is always on the issue when there's a federal election, you know, to end our boil water advisories and help the people that have no water, you know, never give up. And it's tables like this that are going to bring the issues to the forefront and right to the right table, because the squeaky wheel gets the grease. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Could I hear from Tanya or Kendra? I see you're from the same First Nation. Maybe they're away from the computer right now. The gentleman in the corner that's behind the name Cindy, I know that's not your name. Are you able to share or jump in? You have to take off your mute button. There's something on the bottom of the screen that has a little phone. If you press that, the button will come off. There you go. You're on.
Hi. It's not very much I can say. I suppose it's pretty hard to comprehend the things that have been talked about. And yeah, that's all I need to say. There's no comment. I was just listening in to all the conversations.
Okay, thank you.
Hi.
Is there anybody else?
James Smith.
Hi. Go ahead.
My connection's not that great, so I hope I don't cut out too much, but I'm the housing portfolio and the health portfolio for my community. And with regards to the water operator and everything that comes with that, I think our O&M budget, like everybody else's, is pretty much depleted, and it's not sufficient for what we need. And our water operators and our contractors they keep having more and more added to their plate, but there's never any room to increase the budget to make it so they're compensated for the work that they do. Unfortunately, we end up having to take from other programs, and I think that it's a long overdue process where this needs to be looked at as a whole. And I was hoping that our water Director of Public Works, Bill Marion, would be included in this call. I'm not sure if he was sent the invite or if he just was busy, but I definitely think that the O&M budget is really needs to be looked at all as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Bing.
Tell Bill that Bing says hello. I know Bill from way back when.
Will do. Thank you.
Are there
Hi,
any
Melissa.
other thoughts? Okay, yes.
Mamun, again. So when this gender issue has discussed a little bit now, that's a good thing. And I was so glad to hear that there are 2 women working. And it is also good to know that women are picky, so they would be good fit for this type of work. Other than that, like, how about we take a broader lens on that? Like, let's say, bring the issue of single mother is, and also there we have people at the community, they might have issue for working, kind of the way we see, like we still call this type of word that I don't want to use this, like disability part. And there are so many things, like people might have some other health issue to address. At the same time, they also need job. And I don't know how to say this, but in the sense that we are trying to deal with this other issue of LGBTQ, something like this. So I understand that there are so many might be opposition on this, but at the same time, some people still can think over it if it is possible, you know.
Okay. I think we have time to hear from maybe one more person. I'm going to look to Ed. I believe you recall you saying you were an operator before as well.
Yes, that's true. I was operating for my First Nation for the past 12 years. I'm currently a level 1 after I got elected into admin. But as far as standards, you know, like listening to, like I'm just getting into all the learning about the Water Act. You know, like I worked in the plant how many years, and you know, I'll be honest, I never heard of the First Nations Water Act till I joined in on this AFN conference. But as far as standards, you know, like listening to standards like a municipality, you know, federal, cities, you know, I believe First Nations should be at the same standards as our neighbors, right? Because the goal is safe drinking water, right? And the issue there is, how do we get there? Where do we get the funding to have our operators trained, have them paid properly for all the work they do? Like the gentleman that I was listening to there's talking that IRA, he's saying it like it is. Operators do the transportation of the dangerous goods. They do the confined spaces. They do. There's a lot involved for the amount of pay the operator gets, you know, and the guy's got to be committed, you know. Then the interest in operating for the youth is just not there, because there's the pay, and then there's maybe what would help would be a little more learning for the youth on how important it is when they're talking about like water is a traditional, you know, it's part of our tradition, you know, like incorporating that into teaching our children how important it is. And then the interest may arise to them to, you know, like, I want to take care of my First Nation and provide them with good drinking water. But you know, like, yeah, well, you know, that's just my input on it. You know, I'm just learning of the act. I'm gonna actually after this is done, I'm gonna Google it and read up on it, because I never heard of it till now. So yeah, thanks. If you heard that.
I think Bing, yeah. Are you going to respond, Bing? I see you wanted to say something.
I was going to say to Ed, it's okay if you read it, but it's not going anywhere. We're gonna. I think it's good to see how they went wrong, the stuff that went in there that we didn't support, and the whole exercise is to come up with a new legislation, water legislation for First Nations, developed by First Nations.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, and it's to get their standards to potable drinking water. That's the main goal, right?
That's right. Safe. Yeah.
So we're getting zapped back to the other room now.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. The breakout rooms are now closed.
Hi. Sorry, Robin.